Ohio State beat Michigan in 2024. Oh, wait. Damn it. Nope. Check that. 4 years in a row, losing to their rivals. How did it happen? Hey, I'm Coach Ross of Coach Ross Football. On this video, I'm going to dissect how Ohio State, with the roster that they had, lost to their rival in a game where Ohio State was a huge favorite at home. Not only am I going to break this game down, but also going to use some lessons from this game that you could potentially put into your coaching. So stick around to the end of the video because I'm going to talk about some things as far as game planning that were a huge issue in this game 4 years in a row. It pains me to say this. I am from the state of Ohio, so I grew up in this rivalry. Obviously, I grew up and I'm a lifelong Ohio State fan. But as much as it pains me to say 4 years in a row, there are some valuable lessons to learn from this game. It was an embarrassment on my part, especially with a team and a roster that featured the likes of Will Howard, Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins. On defense, you had Jack Sawyer, JTT. You had the Alabama transfer, probably the best safety in the country, and Caleb Downs, and yet they still couldn't get the job done. Michigan was looking like a total underdog. Obviously, their two best players, Will Johnson, the corner on defense, and then Colston Loveland, their tight end, their number one pass catcher, who had more passes or more receptions than any of the other receivers combined on the team of Michigan for the entire season, not playing in this game. It almost seems like a lock for Ohio State. Everyone's just saying they're going to win, but how much are they going to win by? And then the game happened. It seemed almost like a perfect storm. Ohio State was coming into the game with the number one defense in the country. There were multiple games, Penn State to be more certain, even Oregon, when they played Oregon up in Oregon, where they had goal line stands. 4th and short. All right, they were a strong, tough, tenacious defense. And I'm pretty sure they were the number one scoring defense as well. So being that as it was, Michigan coming in, a lot of the talk was, how is Michigan going to move the ball? How is Michigan going to even score? So what does Michigan want? What kind of game does Michigan want? Their whole idea, their whole philosophy in this game was to obviously shorten the game down. Shorten the game down, hopes that Ohio State would make a mistake, keep it low scoring, produce some sort of turnovers, maybe make Ohio State make a mistake, and capitalize on that. And sure enough, what happened? And Ohio State played right into their hands. Early on, they didn't. But Ohio State eventually played the game that Michigan wanted. Michigan did not want to get into a shootout because obviously they couldn't keep up with it. They wanted to slow the game down, keep it in between the 20-yard line. They did not want to sit there and just get into a track meet with Ohio State because they obviously couldn't keep up with that. There was one path for Michigan to win this game, and Ohio State gave them that path. According to this video right here, you can see it how strong and how tenacious the Ohio State defense was. That was the number one defense in the country. Still is the number one defense in the country. And again, they played a hell of a game. Take nothing away from the defense at all. They played a hell of a game, and the offense just simply let them down. So why did the offense let them down? Before I get into the game plan, the rumors around Columbus were that Brian Day's been called soft numerous times, and it obviously gets to him. All right, so he wanted to go out, and his game plan was to go prove a point. We're going to have an inside run. We're going to run in the inside, and we're going to prove a point that this team is not soft, that this team is tough. The other rumor, too, is the Will Howard hit, where he got hit hard in the beginning of the game and kind of looked a little concussed. They weren't sure, but he went back in the game. There's rumors, too, that because of his condition, the coaches were not exactly confident in his abilities to see the field. So there were a lot of rumors swirling around. No one really knows for sure because no one, not even Ryan Day or even Chip Kelly's, going to fully admit to what the game plan was. But it was pretty obvious what it was. It's pretty obvious what it was, and it's pretty obvious that they went away from the things that were working. You have Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, arguably two of the best, greatest offensive minds in the sport today and in the last maybe decade, together, putting together game plans week after week after week after week, along with the talent that they have. The game plan that they came up with for the Ohio State-Michigan game makes and leaves a lot of people scratching their heads, making them wonder what happened or what did they see or how were they planning to attack Michigan? Because it was very, very obvious the advantages they had. They had extreme advantages on the perimeter. Very, very easy advantages with mismatches all over the field as far as trying to cover Jeremiah Smith. They had to bracket Jeremiah Smith almost every single play. Then you have Emeka Egbuka. Then there's Carnell Tate on the outside. Not to mention the tight ends who become weapons. And then you obviously have the two running backs in the backfield. And then Will Howard on top of that is a running threat as well as a decent passer. So there are threats all over the field. And the make of a good offense is having those multiple weapons that you can rely on time and time again, especially when the defense tries to take away one. You have the others there that are just waiting in the wings to try and make their plays happen. You even had Michigan, who even admitted that they went to two high safeties almost exclusively the entire game, and those two high safeties were dedicated to be one over top of Jeremiah Smith and one over top of Emeka Egbuka because they didn't want those two guys to beat them. So therefore, immediately you almost have four defenders taken away. You have a corner and a safety on both sides of the field just taken away because they're worried about two guys. They're using four guys to cover two. So there should be open space all over the field. But that's not what Ohio State's game plans seem to be. It's not. It did at times, and I'm going to go over that. But for the most part, their game plan was to do what they shouldn't have done. You can see, according to these clips you're seeing right now, that Ohio State, their game plan seemed to be like they were going to throw the ball around because that's what they possibly could do to be successful against Michigan. And as you can see, they're throwing quick game to the outside. They're throwing passes across the middle. They're using play action. They throw a slow screen to Travion Henderson. They're doing all sorts of things on the outside. And on top of that, they're mixing up tempo. Every once in a while, they run a running play here and there. But for the most part, it was a lot of throws. It was a lot of throws to the outside, a lot of quick throws, a lot of throws over the middle. And then on top of that, a couple times moving the pocket with Will Howard, basically just keeping away from the strength of the defense, the defensive tackles. So as you can see in these clips, they're showing examples of what they could do against Michigan and what they were doing to have success. And then on top of that, the end of the first half, they go right down the field using tempo, pass, grab two pass interference calls against Jeremiah Smith, against the same player, and then right after that, go right back to him and throw the touchdown to him towards the end of the half. But then I don't know if things changed. I don't know if they saw the defense or the field different. I don't know what it was. I do know that some things changed when this hit happened against Will Howard. Because not long after that, he threw this nasty interception on the red zone, which he should not have thrown that football. And all of a sudden, now you're setting Michigan up with a 1st and goal from basically the 3-yard line. Hard for a defense, any defense, to keep them out then, especially with the momentum they had on the turnover. There's a clip right here where it shows 4th and 1 situation. They show a formation that they've shown basically all season long, where it's almost just going to be Will Howard with the quarterback sneak. But instead, what do? They go off the edge here with Quinshawn on the edge, almost like a quick sweep play. Defense is expecting the quarterback sneak, but they go off the edge. Creative ways to get the ball on the perimeter. Here's another example. This is speed option. They showed this a little bit against Penn State, and it was tough to handle then. But they throw a 3-by-1 to one side, and then they run speed option with Quinshawn and Will Howard to the other side, where there's not as many defenders because they're all focused in, especially when Michigan was obviously dedicating almost 4 players to cover Abuka and Jeremiah Smith. That takes 4 guys off the side of the field, and now you can run speed option to a weak side linebacker and a defensive end that are not the greatest, and you can see the result. But then we saw a lot of this. And then a lot of this. It was just a bunch of runs, whether there was inside zone, it was some sort of stretch play, which in Ryan Day's offensive stretch play has not been very successful. Getting blown up after blown up, and I'm even sitting there watching the game at live saying, why are we running the ball up the middle when we obviously had, most people, if you're football savvy, you could see the obvious advantages that Ohio State had on the edges of the field. But for whatever reason, they had success with it. And what did they do? They went away from it. Why? All right. Many people, if you watch correspondence, they always say, what was the game plan? That was the worst game plan we've ever seen. And the game plan for me seemed like, just by watching it the first time, watching it live, was we're just going to run right at their best defensive tackles, and we're just going to outmuscle them. We're going to out-tough them, which kind of supports the rumors earlier that I talked about, where Ryan Day wanted to prove a point. He was more involved in the offensive game planning this week than he ever has been the entire season, because he wanted to prove a point. That is the rumor. Not saying it's true, but that's the rumor. But again, now it's going back into, here comes the lesson that a lot of us as coaches can learn from, is how do you properly offensive game plan? What do you do? What do you look for? All right. Do you make the mistakes that the Ohio State staff did? Or do you see the obvious and you attack the obvious? Don't even get me started about this play. It's 3rd and 10. We're inside the red zone, and he calls a draw play. We had already not been running very, very well up the middle, and now we want to run up the middle on a 3rd and 10 inside the red zone when our kicker has already missed 1 field goal. So, again, I have to question the offensive game plan in this game. It was not ideal. To my chagrin, we have finished breaking down the game for the most part, the good, the bad, the ugly. And now I want to talk about, like I talked about earlier in the video, learning from those and kind of talking a little bit about game plan. I'm not going to go over it in full on detail because there's so many things to do. There's also many different ways to approach it. Everybody's different. So I'm kind of just go over some of my thought processes and then also give some additional information. So obviously you want to study your opponent's previous games. Most high school teams, they get their previous 2 weeks of their next opponent, and then obviously they ask for other films from other opponents. But break the film down. Really break it down. Have your offensive coaches break down specific areas in the film. Then come together as a staff and figure out what they do well, what they don't do well, where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are. And that's not just the offense, that's not defense. That's all aspects of the game. Special teams, defense, offense, everything. So watch some of your opponent's most recent games, especially their most competitive ones. Analyze how they perform against different types of teams, offense and defensive schemes. And so, using Ohio State as an example, they saw, all right, they had a Michigan, and I won't say a common opponent, but a very similar opponent in Texas. And Texas beat Michigan handily. And Texas threw the ball quite well on them. And it was obvious the advantage that Ohio State had, but just didn't take advantage of it. Key personnel. All right, this goes into what the whole video is about. Essentially, is we were playing to their strengths of their personnel on defense, as the Ohio State Buckeyes were. Pay attention to their key players: quarterback, running back, wide receivers, offensive line, defensive playmakers. Understand their strengths and their weaknesses. It was really quite simple. Anybody with the little football knowledge knew that the Michigan strength of their defense were their 2 defensive tackles, especially with their cornerback being out, and yet we still ran at it. time after time after time again, running to their strengths when we had all the advantage on the outside. So identify your own strengths and weaknesses. Look at your own team. What do you have? What do you do well? All right. What do you do well? So evaluate your team's personnel. Know your own team's strengths and weaknesses in terms of both individual players and overall schemes. Whatever your scheme may be, whether it be air raid, wing T, whatever it might be, whether you a 4-3 defense, a 4-4, a 3-4, a 3-3 stack, whatever it might be, evaluate your schemes and evaluate your personnel. Offensive strength. Are you better at running the ball or passing the ball? Is your quarterback strong in certain types of passes? For example, deep ball, short passes. Defensive strengths. Is your defense good at stopping the run or pressuring the quarterback? Is your secondary strong in coverage or better at defending against the run? And then obviously special teams, where a lot of games are won and lost in special teams, so it needs to be covered, especially in practice. And then you have to evaluate it on film as well. Don't forget to evaluate your special teams matchup as well. Are you effective in the return game? Do you have a strong kicker? All right, so going back to the top in regards to Ohio State. Ohio State should have known their personnel. This is the last game of the last game of the regular season. By that point, you should know your team's strength and weakness. Now, this team was just littered, or is littered, with talent all around. You had talent on the outside. You have talent in the backfield. You have talent at quarterback. Offensive line is the only question mark because of how banged up it is. But when it was fully healthy, it was probably one of the better offensive lines in the country. So overall roster, arguably probably the best in the country. So you knew where your strengths were. You knew that your weakness going into the game was your revamped offensive line. And what do we do? They run straight at their strength with our weakness. Don't get it. Doesn't make sense. So that's a big lesson to learn. Again, Ohio State could have thrown the ball all over Michigan. They were doing it. They were doing very, very well, and then they went away from it for whatever reason. The defense for Ohio State played great. They were obviously overmatching, but they were obviously put into some tough situations because of the Ohio State offense. And then special teams essentially, if you want to break it down, really lost the game for Ohio State. Now, should it have been that close? Probably not. But when it was, the field goal kicker for Ohio State missed 2 kicks. One that typically is an automatic kick and a 39-yard field goal that potentially would have tied the game. And then the other one would have won the game. So all of this, again, are lessons that can be learned when learning your strengths and your weaknesses and knowing your strengths and weaknesses. The thing I want to talk about is create a scheme based on matchups. Football is a game of matchups, just like basketball, even baseball. It's a game of matchups. Where are your best matchups? Where are they? Offensive strategy should be based on your opponent's defense. Create an offensive game plan that exploits their weaknesses. Well, that's what this entire video was about. Ohio State clearly had the edge on the perimeter with their receivers, with their speed to the outside. Michigan's depleted defense, especially with their best corner being out, their linebackers and their secondary being probably their weakest point of their defense, and their defensive tackles and their defensive line being the strongest. And you would think that Ohio State and Ryan Day and Chip Kelly would have seen or would have made a game plan that would have exploited their weakness. And for the most part, but for a good portion of them early in the game, it looked like they saw everything that we saw. But then things changed, or they had another thing drawn up that they wanted to prove a point that they could be tough and physical and strong and run right at their strength. I don't know. If they have a weak pass defense, focus on the air game. Well, that goes without saying. We marched right down the field. Ohio State, I keep saying we, but Ohio State, because I'm a big Ohio State fan. We marched right down the field with a throw game real quick and got a good, quick score. If their defensive line is strong, but their linebackers are weak in coverage, use short, quick passes or screen plays. Well, their defensive line, at least their 2 defensive tackles, were very strong. All right, probably 2 first-round draft picks right there. Probably the first defensive tackles taken off the board. So yeah, that's their strength, and we didn't take advantage of it. Ohio State did not do that. Identify their tendency to blitz and prepare for quick throws, hot routes, protection to counter. Defensive strategy, similarly, adjust your defensive strategy based on their offensive strengths. What did Michigan do well? Well, Michigan was so depleted on offense that, I don't want to say Ohio State's defense just had to show up. They didn't, because there were a couple big plays, but they knew what Michigan wanted to do. Michigan wanted to slow the game down, run the game. So what did Ohio State do? That kind of continued what they did is they crowded the line, put a lot of guys in the box, and they sent pressure. They sent pressure because they had confidence in their defensive backfield, their corners, their safeties to match up with their receivers. And for the most part, they did. They did. I think Michigan totally threw for only 56 yards to the entire game. So they did their job. They did. It's unfortunate the offense put them in a bad situation. If they have a high-powered passing attack, focus on creating pressure on the quarterback and possibly double covering their star receiver. Well, their best player, their best receiver, was not playing in that game. But Ohio State still brought the pressure, which is, one of Jim Knowles, the defense coordinator's staples, is he wants to bring pressure from multiple angles and bring it a lot. If they have a strong running game, focus on stopping the run first and forcing the pass. Yeah, Ohio State did that. They put a lot of guys in the box at the line of scrimmage, at the point of attack, and they were sending pressure from multiple angles on almost every single play. So they knew that they had to shut down the run to win the game. And for the most part, they did. Third downs, be ready for key third down situations, whether it's third and long and third and short. For the most part, again, the defense did that. There were a couple of times where they converted. I'm not sure the conversion rate for Michigan, but Ohio State's defense did their job, and unfortunately it was the offense that let them down that day. Red zone, plan how to defend your score in red zone where space is limited, and how you will adapt to your play calling. So, with regards to the defense, the defense was put in a couple bad situations there because of the offense. So they had to obviously adjust some play calling, but for the most part, they did really good. They gave up one score, and then they forced the turnover on the other side when they were forcing the bad situation. So again, the defense played well, but these are some things that you need to focus on when you are trying to game plan for your opponent. Know the matchups. I cannot stress that enough. Find the matchups where you think you have advantages, and take advantage of them early and often. These are just some final additional points. There's obviously a lot more that goes into game planning. I just wanted to highlight some of the main things, but these are just some additional points that you need to think about when you are getting ready for an opponent. And this is more stuff kind of in-game, so adjust on the fly. Be prepared to make in-game adjustments based on how the game is unfolding. If your opponent starts countering your game plan effectively, don't hesitate to tweak your approach. Well, with regards to Ohio State, if offensively, at least, I want to mainly focus on their offense. It seemed like Ryan Day and Chip Kelly had it figured out, and they were attacking Michigan's weaknesses. They were doing it repeatedly, which was good. Didn't feel like they needed to really change things up or tweak it like this point says, but you may in your game, because obviously, as we all know as football coaches, nothing ever truly goes to plan. There's always something you have to change, something you have to fix. All right. So momentum shifts. If your team is ahead, consider taking fewer risks or controlling the clock. Example, running the ball to shorten the game. If you're trailing, you might need to speed up the pace or take more chances. Yes, football's a game of momentum. All right. Big scores, big turnovers. All right. That changes the mode of the game, the pace of the game. And you saw it clearly. Michigan got up, surprisingly, and what did they want? That played exactly into their hands. They wanted to keep the ball game low scoring, force some turnovers, get a lead, and then just sit on the lead. And that's exactly what they tried to do, and that's exactly what they did. Ohio State really, at times, had the sense of urgency, but for the most part, did not. All right, so expect the momentum shifts in the game. It's going to happen. Always is going to happen. And if the momentum swings in your way, do your best to make sure that you don't allow the momentum to kind of obviously shift back to the other team. Focus on execution. Once you've developed the game plan, make sure it's well rehearsed. Ensure players understand the specific adjustments, techniques, and concepts they need to execute during the game. If you watch my videos or previous videos, you know that with me in offensive play calling, in offensive development, in offensive scheme, it's all about execution. All right, it's a small playbooks, small terminology, all for the purpose of having good execution. Because I believe that if you out execute your team, you can beat a team that is better physically, better, strong, strength wise, speed wise. If you can out execute them, if you do what you're supposed to do and you do it well, then you have a really, really good chance at beating a better team. Be ready for surprises. Your opponent might try to change things up during the game. They could pull out a new formation, blitz, or trick play. Prepare your team to stay adaptable and respond quickly to unexpected changes. So, yeah, Michigan, pulled off a trick play there. They were in the red zone, ran a reverse, and the reverse turned into a pass. Went at Denzel Burke, number 10, in the corner, and he got called for pass interference, and then that put them in the red zone again. But I believe that was the drive that also led to the Jack Sawyer interception, which, kind of worked out at the end. But still, every year, the last few years to get into the Ohio State-Michigan game, Michigan has pulled out some sort of trick play. They have. And a couple of them really, really paid off. I think one in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, paid off big, very, very large with a massive touchdown to the tight end from the halfback pass. So be prepared that the other team is going to pull out something different. Be prepared for the wrinkles. All right. Every coach every week is putting in something new as far as a wrinkle, how they do something different, because obviously your opponent is preparing for what they see. All right. So you have to give them something you haven't seen. So you always have to expect it. So defensive wise, a lot of times that, in my opinion, is good communication, because you're probably going to see a formation or a motion that you're not ready for. How does your defense respond? Do they communicate? Can you kind of simulate that in practice? Can you show some sort of motion that maybe they haven't seen yet that you might expect them to see because it makes sense? Offensively, maybe they show up on a different front. We've been preparing for a 4-man front. All of a sudden they show up in a 3-man front, or they show up in a 5-man front, or they show up on a bear front. How does that change things? What should we do to prepare for that? So you should be practicing for the unexpected, at least having a small area in your practice, in your weekly schedule somewhere, to where you are practicing some things that you haven't seen on film, but there's a possibility that you could see. So how do your kids respond to them? All right, so there you have it. That was my breakdown of the Ohio State-Michigan game. Still going to represent, even though it was a painful loss 4 years in a row. Hope you enjoyed the video. Wanted to touch on this. It's a different video than I've done before in the past. But it did have some teaching points that I wanted to talk about, especially with the game plan. So I hope that helped. Hope it gave you some ideas. Hope shed some light on some things as far as getting ready for opponents in season and in the playoffs too as well. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit that like button. Also subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of this content. Until then, I will see you in the next video.